Imagine standing on a hilltop in the year 117 AD, looking out at a world dominated by a single name, Rome. From the windswept coasts of Portugal to the burning sands of Arabia, from the cold rivers of Scotland to the fertile valleys of Egypt, a single empire casts its shadow across continents. Never before in human history had one civilization reached such heights, commanding millions of lives under its eagle standard. And at the very peak of this mighty colossus stood one man, Emperor Trajan. This was the moment when Rome was at its zenith, stretching farther than ever before, an empire of stone and blood, discipline and ambition. But behind the glory lay questions of power, conquest, and the cost of expansion. This is the story of Rome at its peak. By the dawn of the 2nd century AD, the Roman Empire had already endured centuries of war, civil strife, and triumph. Julius Caesar had crossed the Rubicon and shattered the Republic. Augustus had risen as the first emperor, crafting a system of imperial rule that blended monarchy with republican tradition. And emperors like Claudius, Vespasian, and Titus had added new territories to the empire's map. Yet, it was under Trajan, Rome's Optimus Princeps, the best ruler, that the empire swelled to its greatest territorial extent. Covering nearly 5 million square kilometers and ruling over 70 million people, Rome was not merely a Mediterranean power. It was a superpower in every sense of the word. But what exactly made Trajan's reign the high water mark of Rome's territorial dominance? Who was Trajan? Trajan was not born in Rome. He was a provincial, born in Italica, a Roman colony in Hispania, modern-day Spain. In 53 AD, this already set him apart. For centuries, the highest offices of Rome were dominated by Italian aristocrats. But Trajan represented a new era where men from the provinces could rise to supreme power. Trajan was a soldier first and foremost. His career began in the Roman legions, where he earned a reputation for discipline, bravery, and most importantly, leadership in battle. Unlike some emperors who preferred the luxuries of Rome, Trajan was most comfortable on campaign, sharing the hardships of his soldiers, sleeping under the same tents, and marching the same dusty roads. His military skill and popularity among the legions would become his greatest strength. But his rise to emperor was not just about personal valor. It came at a critical time in Roman history. In 96 AD, Emperor Domitian was assassinated, ending the Flavian dynasty. Domitian's rule had been authoritarian and deeply unpopular with the Senate. To stabilize the empire, the Senate quickly installed an elderly senator named Nerva as emperor. Nerva, however, lacked the support of the army. Rome could not survive without military loyalty, and a fragile empire needed a strong leader. So, in a brilliant move, Nerva adopted Trajan, then a highly respected general, as his son and heir. When Nerva died in 98 AD, Trajan became emperor without bloodshed. This peaceful transition marked the beginning of the Nervan-Antonine dynasty, a line of rulers that historians often call the 5 good emperors Nerva: Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. Among them, Trajan was celebrated as the most expansionist. By the time Trajan came to power, Rome already dominated the Mediterranean, but its emperors had grown cautious. The disasters of earlier emperors, like the humiliating defeat of Varus in the Teutoburg forest under Augustus, had made expansion beyond certain frontiers seem risky. But Trajan thought differently. He was a conqueror in the mold of Alexander the Great, and he believed that the empire could still grow. His eyes first turned toward a rich and dangerous neighbor, the kingdom of Dacia. The Dacians, led by their fierce king Decebalus, were no ordinary enemy. Their homeland, roughly modern-day Romania, was mountainous, rich in resources, and strategically placed north of the Danube River. More importantly, Dacia contained vast gold mines, a treasure Rome desperately craved. For years, the Dacians had been a thorn in Rome's side, raiding across the Danube, and defying Roman power. Trajan resolved to end this once and for all. In 101 AD, he launched his first Dacian campaign. The Roman legions crossed the mighty Danube using one of the most impressive feats of engineering in antiquity, Trajan's Bridge, built by the architect Apollodorus of Damascus. This massive stone and wood bridge stretched nearly 1,100 meters across the river, symbolizing Roman determination to conquer. The battles were brutal. The Dacians fought with ferocity, using guerrilla tactics in the rugged terrain. But Rome's discipline and organization prevailed. By 102 AD, Decebalus was forced to sue for peace, but he remained a threat. So in 105 AD, Trajan launched a second campaign, determined to crush Dacia completely. This time, no mercy was given. Roman legions stormed Dacian fortresses, and by 106 AD, Decebalus took his own life rather than be paraded in a Roman triumph. Dacia was annexed as a Roman province, and its vast wealth flowed into Rome. The conquest was immortalized on Trajan's column, a towering monument in the heart of Rome that still stands today, spiraling upward with carved scenes of the war, a stone comic strip of conquest. This victory made Trajan immensely popular, not only with his soldiers, but with the Roman people, who saw an influx of wealth and glory. Rome was rich. Rome was proud. Rome was unstoppable, but Trajan was not finished. With Dacia secured, his ambitions shifted eastward. The ancient rival of Rome lay in the vast plains of Mesopotamia, the Parthian Empire. For centuries, Rome and Parthia had contested control over Armenia, a buffer state between the two powers. Trajan, however, wanted more than balance. He wanted conquest. In 113 AD, he launched his campaign against Parthia. His armies swept through Armenia, annexing it as a Roman province. Then he marched deeper into Mesopotamia, capturing cities that had stood for millennia. By 116 AD, Trajan had taken Ctesiphon, the Parthian capital, and reached as far as the Persian Gulf. At that moment, the Roman Empire was at its maximum territorial extent. From the Atlantic coast of Spain to the waters of the Gulf, Rome held sway. It seemed as though nothing could stop the eagle from flying ever higher. But expansion brought challenges. The further Rome extended, the more fragile its control became. Local revolts broke out in Mesopotamia. Supplying Roman legions so far from Italy strained the empire's resources. And though Trajan dreamed of further conquest, age and illness began to weigh upon him. In 117 AD, while returning from his eastern campaigns, Trajan fell gravely ill. He died in the city of Selinus in Cilicia, modern-day Turkey. His ashes were returned to Rome and buried beneath Trajan's column, forever tying his memory to the empire's greatest expansion. His adopted son, Hadrian, succeeded him and quickly abandoned many of the eastern conquests, realizing they were unsustainable. Rome had reached its peak, but it would not stay there forever. Rome in Trajan's time was not simply an empire of soldiers. It was a civilization of builders, merchants, farmers, philosophers, and ordinary citizens, all bound together by roads, law, and the Roman identity. At its peak, Rome was home to more than 70 million people, a population larger than many modern nations today. From the icy frontiers of Britain to the deserts of Egypt, people lived under a common system of governance, enjoyed the stability of Roman law, and relied on the protection of the legions. To understand the true might of Rome at its peak, we must leave the battlefield and walk the bustling streets of its cities. Imagine entering Rome, the capital of the empire. In the year 112 AD, the city was already ancient, but under Trajan, it had reached a new level of magnificence. At the center stood the Roman Forum, the political and spiritual heart of the empire. Here, senators debated, merchants traded, and citizens gathered for festivals. But Trajan would add something extraordinary to this already grand cityscape. The Forum of Trajan one of the most ambitious architectural projects in Roman history. Designed by the great architect Apollodorus of Damascus, the Forum was a sprawling complex that included a massive basilica, the Basilica Ulpia, where legal proceedings and business transactions took place, a grand library housing thousands of scrolls, preserving Roman and Greek knowledge, and at its center, the towering Trajan's column, spiraling with carved reliefs that told the story of his conquest of Dacia. This column was not just propaganda, it was history in stone, visible to all who walked Rome's streets. And beneath it lay Trajan's final resting place, a reminder that emperors too became part of the city they built. Rome itself was a metropolis of more than 1 million people, the largest city in the world at the time. Its streets bustled with merchants selling spices from India, silks from China, grain from Egypt, and olive oil from Spain. Aqueducts carried fresh water into the city, fountains gushed in public squares, and bathhouses offered cleanliness and relaxation to rich and poor alike. To live in Rome was to live in the center of the known world. But the Roman Empire was not just Rome. Its true strength came from its provinces, stretching across 3 continents. In Egypt, the Nile supplied Rome with grain, feeding millions. Alexandria was a hub of trade and learning, blending Greek, Roman, and Egyptian cultures. In Gaul and Spain, fertile fields and vineyards provided wheat, wine, and olive oil for the empire's tables. In Britain, tin and iron were mined, while Roman forts dotted the countryside. In the east, cities like Antioch and Ephesus flourished as centers of commerce and culture. What bound these provinces together was not just Roman military power, but also the Roman road network. At its peak, Rome built more than 400,000 kilometers of roads, with about 80,000 kilometers paved in stone. These roads allowed legions to march swiftly, merchants to transport goods, and messages to travel from the farthest frontier to the capital in mere weeks. The saying, "all roads lead to Rome," was not just a metaphor, it was reality. For the ordinary Roman citizen, life varied depending on class, wealth, and location, but stability under Trajan's rule made life generally prosperous. The wealthy elite lived in lavish villas, decorated with mosaics and frescoes, dining on exotic foods like peacock, figs, and imported spices. The middle classes, such as merchants and artisans, lived in multi-story apartment blocks called insulae, often crowded but full of vibrant community life. The poor relied on Rome's system of grain distribution, where the state provided free or subsidized wheat to keep the population fed. Entertainment was everywhere. The Colosseum, completed only decades earlier, hosted gladiatorial games and wild beast hunts. Chariot races roared through the Circus Maximus, where more than 150,000 spectators could cheer their favorite teams. Religion, too, was a unifying force. Romans worshipped a pantheon of gods, blending old Italic traditions with Greek deities and even adopting foreign gods from conquered lands. Under Trajan, emperor worship also grew, with the emperor himself being honored as a near-divine figure. If Rome was great, it was because Rome built. The empire's survival depended not just on conquest, but on the infrastructure that sustained it. Aqueducts carried fresh water from distant springs into cities, providing clean water for drinking, bathing, and fountains. Roads allowed rapid military response and economic trade, laid with such precision that many survive to this day. Bridges and harbors connected distant provinces, ensuring that grain from Egypt or spices from Arabia could reach Rome. Amphitheaters, forums, and temples turned Roman cities into showcases of imperial grandeur. Trajan himself oversaw massive public works. In addition to his forum and column, he built new aqueducts, expanded harbors at Ostia, and improved roads across the empire. His projects weren't only symbols of power, they were practical investments that improved everyday life for millions. Perhaps one of the most remarkable features of Rome at its peak was its global reach. Though Rome never directly ruled India or China, its trade networks stretched that far. Roman merchants eagerly bought silk from China, spices and gems from India, and ivory and incense from Africa. In return, Rome exported wine, olive oil, glassware, and weapons. The Roman denarius, a silver coin, became a common currency of trade across the Mediterranean and beyond. Roman coins have even been found in India, proof of how far the empire's economic influence reached. Under Trajan, these networks flourished, creating a cosmopolitan empire where ideas, goods, and cultures blended. Trajan's reign is often seen as the pinnacle of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace that had been established under Augustus more than a century earlier. For much of the empire, this was a time of stability. Yes, Rome still fought wars on its frontiers, but inside its borders, people enjoyed a level of security and prosperity rare in ancient times. Roads were safe for travel, cities thrived, and Roman law protected property and contracts. This sense of order was a key ingredient in Rome's greatness. It wasn't just the sword that held the empire together. It was the promise of stability, law, and opportunity. Unlike emperors who squandered wealth on personal luxuries, Trajan invested heavily in the empire and the people. He was famous for saying, "I am emperor not for myself, but for my people." He provided generous distributions of food and money, supported orphans through state programs, and made sure public works benefited ordinary citizens. The Senate loved him, the army revered him, and the people adored him. This rare combination of military genius, civic generosity, and political skill earned him the title Optimus Princeps, the best ruler. Unlike emperors who ruled from palaces, Trajan was most at home among the legions. He marched with his soldiers, ate the same rations, endured the same cold nights, and rewarded bravery generously. This bond created an unshakable loyalty. Roman soldiers didn't just fight for Rome, they fought for Trajan. Ancient historians tell us that when Trajan inspected his troops, he greeted each officer personally, asking about their families and campaigns. This personal touch made him beloved, but it also secured discipline. For when soldiers respected their emperor, they obeyed without hesitation. Trajan was not reckless, however. His campaigns were meticulously planned. He understood supply lines, terrain, and the importance of engineering in war. His ability to combine military force with practical logistics was what allowed Rome to push beyond its traditional frontiers. Yet, while he was hailed as a conqueror, Trajan was also careful to present himself as a guardian of Rome's traditions. He respected the Senate, maintained republican customs, and portrayed himself not as a tyrant, but as a servant of the people. This delicate balance of military might and civic humility is why Roman historians later looked back on his reign as a golden standard of rulership. But even at the height of Rome's glory, the empire was not invincible. Beneath the glittering marble of Trajan's Rome, cracks were forming. First, there was the question of scale. At its greatest territorial extent, the empire stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia. Governing such vast lands was a logistical nightmare. Messages could take weeks to travel, armies months to march, and rebellions could erupt faster than reinforcements could arrive. Second, there was the economic strain. Conquests like Dacia had brought immense wealth, but sustaining wars in the east drained resources. Maintaining legions across distant frontiers was costly, and Rome relied heavily on taxes from its provinces. While Rome was still prosperous, its expansion had reached a dangerous tipping point. Third, there was the social divide. While the elites of Rome grew richer, many in the provinces felt exploited. Revolts, though rare during Trajan's reign, simmered beneath the surface. In 116 AD, major Jewish revolts broke out in Cyrene, Egypt, and Cyprus, destabilizing parts of the empire. Finally, there was the question of succession. Trajan had no biological children. The stability of Rome often hinged on a smooth transfer of power, and without a clear heir, uncertainty loomed. Trajan's greatest military achievement, the conquest of Mesopotamia, also revealed the limits of Rome's power. Though his armies marched as far as the Persian Gulf, these lands were far harder to control than Dacia. The terrain was vast, the local populations resistant, and the supply lines stretched dangerously thin. Almost as soon as Trajan captured cities, rebellions flared. Guerrilla resistance, foreign incursions, and logistical problems made it clear that holding Mesopotamia would require endless manpower and wealth. Even Trajan himself began to realize that the dream of pushing further east, perhaps even to India, was unrealistic. Unlike the riches of Dacia, which could be absorbed into the empire, the east was a quagmire. Here lay a bitter truth. Rome had reached its peak, but its expansion had also revealed its limits. The eagle could fly no higher without breaking its wings. In 117 AD, while traveling back from his eastern campaigns, Trajan fell gravely ill in the city of Selinus in Cilicia, modern-day Turkey. He never returned to Rome. On his deathbed, Trajan reportedly adopted Hadrian, his trusted general and fellow Spaniard, though some sources suggest this decision may have been arranged by his wife, Plotina, after his death. Regardless, Hadrian became emperor, marking a turning point in Roman policy. Where Trajan had been a conqueror, Hadrian would become a consolidator. He recognized that the empire had grown too vast, and he quickly abandoned Mesopotamia, pulling back to defensible frontiers. Under him, Rome would build walls instead of bridges, fortify borders instead of seeking new lands. The age of conquest had ended. The year 117 AD is remembered as the moment Rome reached its greatest territorial extent. But what did this really mean? To the Romans, it was proof that their gods, their culture, and their way of life were supreme. Trajan's triumphs were celebrated in parades, monuments, and coins, symbols of an empire without rival. To modern historians, however, it marks a turning point. For while Rome would continue for centuries, it would never again expand so far. The empire had touched its limits, and from this point onward, it would struggle to maintain what it already held. The peak of empire is always a moment of pride, but it is also the prelude to decline. Rome had conquered the known world, but in doing so, it had sown the seeds of overextension, division, and eventual decay. Even after his death, Trajan remained the model emperor. The Senate conferred upon him the title Optimus Princeps, the best ruler. For centuries afterward, new emperors were blessed with the phrase, "May you be luckier than Augustus, and better than Trajan." This was the highest compliment Rome could give. Augustus had founded the empire, but Trajan had taken it to its greatest glory. His column still stands in Rome today, a 30-meter stone testament to his victories. His forum, though ruined, still hints at the grandeur of his vision. And his memory lives on, not just as a conqueror, but as a leader who combined ambition with generosity, power with responsibility. Every empire has its high point moment when it seems invincible, eternal, destined to rule forever. For Rome, that moment was 117 AD under Trajan. But history teaches us that peaks are fragile. They are not permanent plateaus, but fleeting moments before the slow descent begins. Even at Rome's height, problems loomed. The sheer size of the empire made governance difficult. The economy relied heavily on conquest and new wealth. Cultural and religious tensions simmered beneath the surface. And without clear succession, stability always depended on the character of the next ruler. Trajan had balanced these forces brilliantly, but his death left questions that no emperor could fully resolve. The greatness of Rome was real, but it was also precarious. When Hadrian took power, he made a decision that symbolized Rome's changing destiny. He gave up Trajan's conquests in Mesopotamia. To many Romans, this seemed like weakness. Why surrender what the legions had won? But Hadrian understood a hard truth. Rome had stretched too far. Expansion could no longer be sustained. Instead, he turned inward, building walls, most famously Hadrian's Wall in Britain. He focused on securing borders, reforming administration, and stabilizing the empire. Rome was still mighty, but its days of great conquest were over. The torch of empire shifted from expansion to preservation. So what does it mean to say Rome reached its peak under Trajan? On one level, it's geographical. The empire covered more land than ever before. From Scotland to Arabia, Spain to Mesopotamia, Rome ruled a territory of unmatched scope. But on a deeper level, it symbolizes something more profound, the limit of human ambition. Rome had reached the edge of what was possible for an ancient empire. No amount of legions, no network of roads, no brilliant emperor could overcome the challenges of scale, distance, and diversity. The peak of Rome is not just about what was gained, it's about what could no longer be sustained. The story of Trajan and Rome at its peak still resonates today. For in every age, empires and nations rise, expand, and dream of eternal glory. But history whispers a warning. Expansion brings power, but also vulnerability. Wealth and monuments impress, but they hide the fractures beneath. The greatest leaders can delay decline, but not prevent it forever. Rome at its peak teaches us that true strength is not only in conquest, but in stability, justice, and vision for the future. Trajan embodied many of these ideals. He was not perfect, his wars were bloody, his conquests costly, but he ruled with a sense of duty rare among emperors. He remains a model of what leadership can achieve when it blends ambition with service. After Trajan, the empire endured for centuries. The Antonine emperors kept stability for a time, but eventually Rome fractured, weakened, and fell. And yet, Rome never truly disappeared. Its roads became the pathways of Europe. Its laws influenced modern justice. Its language gave birth to Italian, French, Spanish, and more. Its monuments inspired architects for millennia. Even now, when we think of empire, we think of Rome. And when we think of Rome at its greatest, we think of Trajan. Picture it. The year is 117 AD. A Roman legionnaire stands at the edge of the Persian Gulf, looking out at the horizon. Behind him stretches a world conquered, an empire that seems eternal. From this point on, no one would ever forget the reach of Rome. But history is a tide. Empires rise and fall. And though the Roman eagle soared higher than any before it, even it could not outfly time. Rome at its peak was a mirror of humanity's greatest ambitions and its greatest limits. And at the center of it all was one man, Trajan, Optimus Princeps, the emperor who brought Rome to the summit of its power.